Hello and welcome to episode 41 of the Statesmanship Project. My name is Ross and I will be your host. I just got done listening to a podcast on Dan John University where he talks about the salient point that I want to make is that he says, he has the ability to talk about many different things because he's done many different things, many different programs. And so what I want to discuss is State of the Union citizenship. It's something that I have done, something I know about and can speak from experience on which I can speak from experience, I guess is the appropriate way to say that. Anyway, I digress. One of the first things we need to understand is the difference between the corporate person and the living man or woman. So, if you've ever started a business, one of the things you have to do is fill out paperwork in which you name the business and you put it in all capital letters. The reason for this is because in legalese, anytime they write a document, or if you've ever signed a contract, you'll see this as well. And most contracts are written out, such and such LLC, now known as employer, and then your name, now known as employee, and then the rest of the agreement is pretty boilerplate, employer, employee, yada yada, nonsense, whatever, or leaseor and leasee, things like that. And the all caps designates a corporation. It does not designate a living man or woman. A living man or woman's name is written in all lowercase. So all capitals in a legal document is the name of a corporation. So if you look at your driver's license or any other state-issued ID, even your passport, your, in quotes, name will appear in all capital letters. And the reason for that is not so it's easy to see. It is because it designates the name of a corporation. When you are born, your name is put onto a document called a birth certificate, and that birth certificate is printed on 32-pound banknote paper, which makes it a legally binding financial instrument. And then that becomes the actual corporate person. And that is the item against which all debts are levied by this country. All fines are levied should you speed or break some other municipal policy. And any other legal violation that you make is levied against that corporate person. And so you have to have forms of identification on you because that is what creates joinder between you, the living man or woman, and that corporation. And what we see is that the ID is there not to establish your identity, but to hold you, the living man or woman, accountable for whatever violations are levied against that corporation. And that's why you have to have a photo with your driver's license, a photo with your passport, because what that does is it creates joinder, and that way the policy officer or police officer can look at that and say, okay, you are acting in conjunction with this corporate person. Living in the Private goes through and reestablishes your contracts with these organizations and states that specifically the driver's license is held so that cops don't drag you out of the car and arrest you for driving without a license. And driving is a corporate term. When you go around in your vehicle, your truck or car, you are simply traveling, but driving is a commercial term. And if you are engaged in commerce, then you are liable to the laws that they write. But if you are not engaged in commerce, you are not liable for the laws that they write. And so we want to make this distinction, first in your head, second in reality, should you be challenged on it, that you are not engaged in commerce. But I get ahead of myself. So let's bring it back to the idea of the corporate person. And so we see that we have identification that has the name of the corporate person on it and our picture as a living man or woman. And this creates joinder, and identification means two separate things acting as one. And so you, the living man or woman, and that corporation. And so you are the liable party for that. And when you become a living man or woman and you become a State of the Union citizen, you change that jurisdiction. You are no longer the liable party for it. You are the trustee, if I understand it correctly. And that corporation then benefits you, the living man or woman. It no longer benefits the government. And in large part, as a living in the private program, states you don't really use your corporate person. You want to use it as little as possible, because that's how they establish jurisdiction over you, how the government establishes jurisdiction over you. And so what we want to do is recognize the distinction between who we are as a living man or woman, sovereign under God, and a corporation that is created by the government for the benefit of the government. In the Supreme Court case Rundle v. Delaware, it states that a corporation cannot do business with a living man or woman. And so this establishes the legal precedent by which we know that a corporation is different from a living man or woman. And our corporate person is the corporation by which they use to hold us accountable for their policies, for their tax laws, all of these horrendous things that we disagree with. And so by coming out of the beast system, by becoming a living in the private person, we recognize that there is a distinction between these two. And in doing that, we take our rightful place, our sovereign place, as children of God. This leads us into the other distinction that edifies the point, which is legally. The difference between the legal system and a lawful court is that the legal system relies on the corporation and you creating joinder. And so you need to establish residency in order for them to have jurisdiction over you, because as a resident, you are subject to the policies and codes and statutes of the United States Corporation. But if you are not a resident, if you are a living man or woman who lives on the land, you are not subject to their policies and jurisdiction. And this is the difference between a legal court and a lawful court. A lawful court is in common law, and this is why it is required for you to be able to face your accuser, because it is between two living men or women. You have an aggrieved party, and the aggrieved party makes an accusation against another party who has caused them harm. And this is why you have an appearance in court, and you can face your accuser, and your accuser has to identify you specifically through sight or through a preponderance of evidence. The legal system does not rely on this. The legal system writes policies, and they levy fines, and they expect you to pay, and then if you don't pay, then they come and arrest you. And you don't have an accuser, and there's no victim. And this is a distinct difference between the two systems. And this is also how we can establish the relevance of an actual living in the private position of a living man, and that it actually exists and is recognized in law. Because a civil law, in common law, all crimes have to have a victim, and the victim has to be able to identify their victimizer. And so if you cause harm to someone, there has to be a victim. If you violate a law of some kind, you have to have inflicted harm on another living person in some way, whether damaging their property or their person. And there has to be evidence of that. Beyond that, there is no lawful or legal authority that can do anything to you. And the legal superstructure that has been created makes it possible for police and governments and tax authorities to come and collect money from you at their whim, at their beck and call. And they do this because, well, it makes it a lot easier for them to earn revenue and maintain power over you and maintain control. And so by going into the living in the private program, we want to eliminate this from their ability. And we become free. Hope I didn't ramble too much. I hope this makes sense and was easy to follow and you find this information useful. Oh, one last thing I do want to say is that if you're looking into these programs, if anybody promises you anything, like special privileges or money of some kind given to you by the government for doing this or anything like that, it's a scam. There's no money in doing this other than the ability to retain all of the money that you earn. You no longer pay taxes. You do have to pay some sales tax, but there are times when you can opt out of it. So keep that in mind. If somebody says, oh yeah, you'll get all this money for doing it, or the government will pay you to do this, or you'll get this special status on your passport, it's a lie. You don't get any of that. The only protection you have is if you are ever drawn into a court of law. Then you have protection. But otherwise, you are just left alone, and you don't engage with their systems. You know, I recently traveled to Switzerland. They looked at my passport, had no problems. Anywhere in the either customs side, whether it was in Switzerland or in the United States, no problem whatsoever with any of it. Let us out, let us back in. No concerns, but no special privileges either. So keep that in mind. If they're promising you anything like that, it's a scam. You don't get any of that. All right. I hope this has been helpful, and I hope it hasn't been too long. And until next time, have a good day.